They thought she was nobody. In the cold, sterile air of the Seattle Superior Court, Elena sat alone, wearing a faded coat, while her ex-husband and his high-priced legal sharks laughed at her. They mocked her silence. They ridiculed her poverty. They thought they had won the war before the judge even took his seat. Mark, her husband of 5 years, believed he was discarding a broken woman who had leached off his success. But he didn't know the truth. He didn't know that the woman he was destroying was worth more than the entire city block. This is the shocking true story of how a quiet housewife humiliated her arrogant ex-husband by revealing a secret that shook the financial world. Watch until the end, because revenge is a dish best served with a billion-dollar check. The fluorescent lights of Courtroom 4B in the Seattle King County Courthouse buzzed with an annoying, low-frequency hum that seemed to drill directly into Elena's skull. It was raining outside, a grey, miserable Tuesday in November, and the windows were streaked with grime and water. But inside, the atmosphere was dry, suffocating, and smelled faintly of floor wax and stale coffee. Elena Vance sat at the defendant's table. The chair was hard wood, uncomfortable, and she sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap. Her knuckles were white. She wore a beige wool coat that had seen better days. The cuffs were slightly frayed, and the buttons were loose. Underneath, she wore a simple white blouse and black slacks she had bought at a discount store 3 years ago. To anyone looking at her, she was the picture of defeat. A woman past her prime, discarded, broken, and poor. Across the aisle, the atmosphere was entirely different. Mark Vance, her husband, soon-to-be ex-husband, leaned back in his leather chair, radiating the arrogance of a man who had never been told no in his adult life. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit from Savile Row, a Rolex Submariner glinting on his wrist, and his hair was styled to perfection. He looked every inch the successful tech CFO he was. Next to him sat his attorney, Arthur Sterling. Sterling was a man whose reputation preceded him. He was known in the legal circles of Washington state as the Butcher. He didn't just win divorce cases, he annihilated the opposition. He charged $600 an hour, and Mark was happy to pay it just to see Elena suffer. "Your Honor," Sterling began, standing up and buttoning his jacket. His voice was smooth, practiced, and dripping with condescension. "My client, Mr. Vance, has been exceedingly generous. We are offering Mrs. Vance a one-time settlement of $10,000. Considering she has contributed absolutely nothing to the household finances for the last 5 years, we believe this is more than charity. It is a gift." The judge, a stern man named Frederick Thorne, looked over his spectacles at Elena. "Does the defendant have legal counsel present?" Elena looked up. Her voice was soft, barely a whisper. "No, Your Honor. I am representing myself." A stifled laugh came from the plaintiff's table. Mark covered his mouth, but his eyes were dancing with amusement. He leaned over to Sterling and whispered loud enough for the front row to hear. "She probably couldn't afford a bus ticket here, let alone a lawyer." Sterling smirked. "As I was saying, Your Honor, my client has built his fortune through blood, sweat, and tears at Horizon Dynamics. He is a self-made man. Mrs. Vance, on the other hand, has spent the last 5 years finding herself. She has no income, no assets, and frankly, no claim to my client's hard-earned money. We are asking for a summary judgment. The prenuptial agreement, which she signed, is clear. What is his is his. What is hers? Well, she has nothing." Eleanor felt the heat rise in her cheeks. It wasn't shame, though they thought it was. It was a simmering, volcanic rage. She remembered the day she met Mark. He hadn't been a CFO then. He had been a junior analyst, struggling to pay rent on a studio apartment in the Capitol Hill district. She had loved him for his ambition, for the way he looked at her with wide, dreamy eyes and talked about the future. But money had changed him. As he climbed the corporate ladder at Horizon Dynamics, receiving bonuses and stock options, he had become cold. He started staying out late. He started criticizing her clothes, her cooking, her quiet nature. He told her she was embarrassing him at company galas because she didn't know how to talk about the stock market or luxury cars. "Mrs. Vance," Judge Thorne's voice snapped her back to the present. "Do you have a response to the plaintiff's motion?" Eleanor stood up. Her legs felt heavy. She looked at Mark. He wasn't looking at her. He was checking his phone, likely texting Jessica, his 24-year-old assistant, the woman he was leaving Eleanor for, the woman he had bought a Porsche for last week, using money from their joint account before he froze it. "Your Honor," Elena said, her voice shaking slightly before steadying, "Mr. Sterling claims I contributed nothing, but I supported Mark when he was unemployed for 6 months in 2019. I paid our rent. I bought his interview suits. I cooked his meals and proofread his resumes." Sterling cut in, sounding bored. "Emotional support does not equate to financial equity in the state of Washington, Mrs. Vance. Unless you have receipts proving you invested capital into Horizon Dynamics, your sob story is irrelevant. The law is about numbers, not feelings." "He's right, Elena," Mark spoke up, not bothering to address the judge. He swiveled his chair to face her, a cruel sneer on his face. "Face it. You were a passenger. I drove the car. Now the ride is over. Take the 10 grand and go back to whatever trailer park you crawled out of." The courtroom went silent. Even the court reporter paused. It was a display of naked cruelty that made the jurors in the back row shift uncomfortably. Judge Thorne frowned. "Mr. Vantas, you will address the court, not the defendant, and you will maintain decorum." "Apologies, Judge," Mark said, not looking sorry at all. "It's just frustrating. I want to move on with my life. I have a business to run. I have a merger with Global Tech Solutions happening next week. I don't have time for this." He gestured vaguely at Eleanor, as if she were a stain on the carpet. Eleanor looked down at the table. On it lay a single manila folder. It wasn't thick. It contained just 3 pieces of paper. She had given Mark every chance. For months, during the separation, she had asked him to be fair. She didn't want his millions. She just wanted an apology. She wanted him to acknowledge that she had been a good wife. But he had chosen war. He had chosen to evict her from their home, block her credit cards, and slander her name to their mutual friends. He wanted to crush her. "Is there any other evidence to present?" the judge asked, looking at the clock. "If not, I am inclined to rule on the validity of the prenup." "Actually, Your Honor," Elena said, her voice suddenly changing. The tremble was gone. The softness was gone. In its place was a tone of ice-cold steel, a tone that sounded strangely authoritative for a woman in a thrift store coat. "I do have one witness I would like to call. They are running a few minutes late due to the weather, but they should be here any second." Sterling rolled his eyes. "A witness? Who? Your mother? A neighbor who saw you bake cookies? This is a waste of the court's time." "No," Elena said, lifting her chin. "My attorney." Mark laughed out loud. "You just said you didn't have one. You said you were representing yourself." "I said I was representing myself at this moment," Elena corrected him. "But for the division of assets, I thought it best to bring in a specialist." At that exact moment, the heavy oak double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a loud boom. The room turned. Walking into the courtroom was not a disheveled public defender. It was a phalanx of 4 people. In the lead was a man in a navy blue, three-piece Italian suit that cost more than Mark's car. He carried a leather briefcase with gold clasps. He walked with the stride of a man who owned the building. Mark's face went pale. He recognized the man. Everyone in the business world recognized him. It was Jonathan Rothschild, senior partner at Rothschild, Black & Associates, the most expensive, exclusive, and feared corporate law firm in New York City. They didn't handle divorces. They handled international mergers, government collapses, and billionaire disputes. Sterling, the shark, suddenly looked like a minnow. He stood up, his mouth hanging open. Mr. Rothschild. Jonathan Rothschild ignored him. He walked straight to the defendant's table, ignored the judge for a split second, and bowed his head slightly to Eleanor. "Apologies for the delay, madam," Rothschild said, his voice baritone and smooth. The private jet had some trouble getting clearance at SeaTac due to the storm. He placed his briefcase on the table and turned to the judge. "Your Honor," Rothschild boomed, "I am entering my appearance as counsel for Mrs. Elena, well, formerly Vance, but legally she is Elena Sinclair." Mark frowned, confused. "Sinclair? What kind of made-up name is that?" But Judge Thorne didn't look confused. He looked terrified. "Sinclair? As in the Sinclair Consortium?" Rothschild smiled, a predatory grin that showed too many teeth. "Precisely, Your Honor. And we are countersuing Mr. Vance. Not for alimony, but for fraud, embezzlement, and breach of contract regarding the acquisition of his company, Horizon Dynamics." Mark stood up, his hands shaking. "What are you talking about? I own Horizon. She has nothing to do with it." Elena finally turned to look at Mark. She slowly unbuttoned her frayed beige coat. She slipped it off her shoulders, revealing the label on the inside of her simple blazer. It wasn't store brand. It was vintage Chanel. "Actually, Mark," Elena said, her voice ringing clear through the silence, "you don't own Horizon Dynamics. You never did. The venture capital firm that funded you 5 years ago? Vanguard Ventures. That's a shell company." She took a step closer to him. "I own Vanguard, which means I own Horizon. I own your office. I own your servers. I even own the chair you sit in every day." The courtroom erupted. To understand the gravity of the silence that fell over the courtroom, you have to understand the scale of the lie Elena had lived. 5 years ago, Elena Sinclair was 24 years old, and the sole heiress to the Sinclair Consortium, a logistics and shipping empire started by her grandfather, Silas Sinclair. The company moved 40% of the cargo in the Northern Hemisphere. Her net worth wasn't public knowledge, but Forbes estimated the family trust at roughly $12 billion. But Eleanor was lonely. She had spent her entire life surrounded by people who only saw her last name. Men dated her to get close to her father. Friends befriended her to get invitations to galas in Monaco or weekends in the Hamptons. She was constantly guarded, constantly paranoid, and deeply unhappy. When her father passed away, leaving her everything, the pressure became unbearable. She wanted to disappear. She wanted to know, just once, what it felt like to be loved for Elena, not for the billions attached to her signature. So, she created an alter ego, Elena Vance, using her mother's maiden name. She moved to Seattle, a city far enough from the old money circles of New York and London. She rented a small, somewhat drafty apartment in a working-class neighborhood. She got a job as a librarian, a job she genuinely loved. She drove a used Honda Civic. She budgeted for groceries. And then she met Mark. He was charming then. They met at a coffee shop on a rainy afternoon. He had spilled his latte on her book, apologized profusely, and offered to buy her a new one. He didn't know she could buy the publishing company. He just saw a girl with wet hair and a kind smile. Their courtship was the happiest time of her life. Mark was ambitious, but struggling. He worked in IT and had big dreams of starting his own tech firm. Elena supported him emotionally, listening to his pitches late into the night. When he proposed 2 years later, with a modest diamond ring that cost him 3 months' salary, she cried tears of genuine joy. It was the only thing she had ever owned that felt real. But the cracks started to form shortly after the wedding. Mark's ambition began to curdle into greed. He became obsessed with status. He constantly compared himself to his peers who were making millions. "I need funding, Elena," he had complained one night over a dinner of spaghetti. "I have the software. I have the vision for Horizon, but no bank will touch me without collateral." Elena wanted to help him. She wanted him to succeed, but she couldn't reveal who she was. If she dropped a check for $5 million on the table, their entire dynamic would shatter. He would know she had tested him. He would feel betrayed, or worse, he would change into one of the sycophants she hated. So, she pulled strings from the shadows. She contacted the trustee of her family fund, a man named Mr. Henderson, and instructed him to set up a shell company called Vanguard Ventures. She told Henderson to approach Mark as an angel investor who saw potential in him. It worked. Mark got his funding. Horizon Dynamics was born. Mark came home that day, popping a bottle of cheap champagne. "I did it, babe. I charmed them. They loved my pitch. I'm going to be a CEO." Elena had smiled, toasting him. "I'm so proud of you, Mark. You did this." She let him believe it was his charisma. She let him take all the credit. But as Horizon grew, Mark changed. The money from the investors gave him a salary, an expense account, and a newfound arrogance. He started buying expensive suits. He started working late. He stopped asking Eleanor about her day at the library. Then came the other woman. Elena first noticed the scent of perfume that wasn't hers on his shirts. Then the late-night texts. Then the password change on his phone. The final straw was 3 months ago. Mark had come home drunk, smelling of whiskey and expensive perfume. "You know what the problem is with you, Elena?" he had slurred, looking at her as she sat reading on the couch. "You have no ambition. You're content being a nobody. I'm a CEO now. I need a partner who matches my energy, not a librarian." He had laughed. "My lawyer says I need a prenup. Well, too late for that. But he says I can get out of this marriage cheap because you haven't contributed a dime to the company." That night, Elena cried herself to sleep. Not because she was losing him, the man she loved had died years ago, but because she realized her experiment had failed. She had looked for true love in a man who, given the chance, chose money over character every time. She decided then and there. If he wanted a war over money, she would give him one. But it wouldn't be a war for his money. It would be a revelation of hers. Back in the courtroom, the shockwave of her revelation was still settling. Mark was shaking his head, his face a mask of disbelief. You're lying." "Vanguard Ventures is a group of investors from Zurich. I've met them on Zoom." Jonathan Rothschild stepped forward, opening his briefcase. He pulled out a thick stack of documents, bound in red tape. "Actors, Mr. Vance," Rothschild said dismissively, "hired by the Sinclair estate to interface with you. But if you look at the incorporation documents of Vanguard Ventures..." He slid a paper across the table toward Mark and Sterling. Sterling grabbed it, his hands trembling. He adjusted his glasses. He read the bottom line. "Sole beneficiary and proprietor, Elena Marie Sinclair." Sterling dropped the paper as if it were burning hot. He looked at Elena with wide, terrified eyes. He knew the name Sinclair. He knew that the Sinclair legal team had bankrupted 3 of his colleagues in the past decade just for sport. This changes the complexion of the proceedings, Sterling stammered, sweat beading on his forehead. It does indeed, Rothschild said coolly. You see, Mr. Vance signed a contract with Vanguard receiving his funding. Clause 14, Section B. In the event of gross misconduct, moral turpitude, or criminal negligence by the CEO, the parent company reserves the right to dissolve the board and seize all assets and intellectual property immediately. Rothschild turned to the judge. We have evidence that Mr. Vance has been using company funds technically belonging to Mrs. Sinclair, to purchase personal gifts for his mistress, Miss Jessica Miller. A Porsche Cayenne, specifically, and a condo in Belltown. The gallery gasped. Mark stood up, his face purple. That's my money. I earned it. I built that company. Elena remained seated. She looked at Mark, her eyes devoid of the love she once held. Mark, she said softly, do you remember our 2nd anniversary? We were eating pizza on the floor because we couldn't afford a table. You told me that money didn't matter, as long as we had each other. Mark stared at her, breathing hard. I believed you, Elena said. I hid who I was, because I wanted to be sure. I wanted to be sure you loved me. And the moment you got a taste of power, you treated me like garbage. You mocked me for being poor, Mark. You mocked the very thing that made our love real. She stood up slowly, smoothing her Chanel blazer. You wanted a divorce? You have it. But you aren't leaving here with half of Horizon. You're leaving here with exactly what you had when I met you. Nothing. You can't do this, Mark screamed. I'll sue you. I'll take you for everything. Rothschild chuckled darkly. Mr. Vance, I would advise against threatening the Sinclair Consortium. My client is currently worth an estimated $14 billion. We can keep you in court litigation until your grandchildren are old enough to retire. Or you can sign the papers we have prepared, resign as CEO effective immediately, and walk away. Walk away with what? Mark snarled. Eleanor picked up a $1 bill from her purse. She walked over to the plaintiff's table and placed it gently in front of Mark. With this, she said, a settlement. $1. And the memory of the biggest mistake you ever made. Mark stared at the dollar bill, his hands clenched into fists. The humiliation was total. The court reporter had stopped typing, mouth agape. But the drama was far from over, because while Mark was a greedy fool, he wasn't alone. And somewhere in the back of the courtroom, a man in a dark trench coat stood up and slipped out the door. He made a phone call. She's here, the man whispered into the phone. The Sinclair heiress. She's been hiding in Seattle the whole time. Initiate Plan B. Elena thought she had won. She thought exposing Mark was the end of the story. She didn't realize that by revealing her identity, she had just painted a target on her back for enemies far more dangerous than a greedy ex-husband. The rain outside the King County Courthouse had turned into a deluge, hammering against the pavement like bullets. But for Elena, stepping out of the heavy oak doors felt like walking into the first day of spring. The paparazzi hadn't arrived yet. Jonathan Rothschild had ensured a media blackout for the next hour, a favor called in from a contact at the Associated Press. That was the power of the Sinclair name. It bought silence just as easily as it bought noise. A sleek, black Cadillac Escalade with tinted windows pulled up to the curb the moment Elena's heel touched the sidewalk. A large man in a suit, with an earpiece coiled behind his ear, stepped out and opened the rear door. This was Graves, her family's head of security, a man who had served in the British SAS, and who had been visibly pained to watch Elena live in poverty for 5 years. "Welcome back, Miss Sinclair," Graves rumbled, his voice like gravel. "We have your change of clothes at the hotel, or would you prefer to go straight to the airfield? The Gulfstream G650 is fueled and ready at Boeing Field." Elena paused, looking back at the courthouse doors. Mark stumbled out a moment later, looking like a drowned rat. He had lost his umbrella, or perhaps he had forgotten it in his daze. Arthur Sterling, his shark lawyer, was nowhere to be seen. Rats, after all, are the first to flee a sinking ship. Mark saw the Escalade. He saw Graves. He saw the way Elena stood, straight-backed, regal, untouchable. He ran toward her, splashing through a puddle, ruining his Italian loafers. "Elena, wait!" Mark shouted, his voice cracking. Graves stepped forward, a mountain of muscle blocking Mark's path. He didn't touch Mark, he just existed in his space, radiating a threat that made Mark skid to a halt. "Let him speak, Graves," Elena said from the open door of the car. She didn't step out, she just lowered the window halfway. Mark panted, wiping rain from his eyes. "Elena, please. This is insanity. You played me. You entrapped me. You can't just take the company. I have relationships with vendors. I have a merger with Global Tech." "The merger with Global Tech is dead, Mark," Elena said, her voice devoid of emotion. "I called the CEO of Global Tech, Mr. Anderson, during the court recess. It turns out his firm has a strict policy against doing business with executives under investigation for embezzlement. And since my audit team is currently tearing through your servers, that investigation is very real." Mark's jaw dropped. You destroyed my reputation?" "You destroyed it yourself," Elena corrected. "I just turned on the lights. You were stealing, Mark. You were siphoning money meant for R&D into offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. Did you think Vanguard Ventures? Did you think I wouldn't notice?" "I did it for us," Mark lied, desperation wild in his eyes. "I wanted to buy us a vacation home. I wanted to surprise you." Elena laughed. It was a dry, humorless sound. "You bought a condo in Belltown for Jessica. You bought a Porsche for Jessica. Don't insult my intelligence. You fell in love with the lifestyle I gave you, not the woman who gave it to you." She signaled to Graves. "Let's go." "Elena, I still love you," Mark screamed at the closing window. "I can change. Give me another chance." The heavy door slammed shut, sealing out his voice and the rain. Elena leaned back into the heated leather seat and closed her eyes. A single tear escaped, tracing a line down her cheek. She wiped it away instantly. Elena Vance might have cried for him. Elena Sinclair had work to do. "Where to, madam?" the driver asked. "The Horizon Dynamics headquarters in Bellevue," Elena said, opening her eyes. They were hard now. "It's time to take out the trash." 20 minutes later, the Escalade screeched to a halt in front of the glass and steel skyscraper that housed Horizon Dynamics. The lobby was quiet. The receptionist, a young woman named Sarah, who had always been kind to Eleanor when she visited Mark for lunch, back when he allowed her to visit, looked up in surprise. "Mrs. Vance?" Sarah asked, confused by the entourage of security guards entering with her. "Mark, Mr. Vance isn't back from court yet." "I know," Elena said, walking past the desk. "And he won't be coming back. Ever." She marched to the elevator, swiping a master key card that Graves handed her. They rode up to the 40th floor, the executive suite. When the elevator doors opened, the office was buzzing. Mark's team, a group of sycophants and yes-men he had hired to stroke his ego, were drinking scotch in the conference room, celebrating what they assumed was Mark's victory in court. Jessica Miller, his assistant and mistress, was sitting on the edge of the mahogany table, laughing loudly. She was wearing a diamond bracelet Elena recognized. It had been purchased with company funds last month. The room went silent as Elena walked in. Graves and 2 other security officers stood behind her. "What are you doing here?" Jessica sneered, hopping off the table. She smoothed her short skirt. "Did you come to beg for alimony? Mark told us he was going to crush you." Elena didn't look at Jessica. She looked at the head of HR, a man named Peters, who was holding a glass of whiskey. "Mr. Peters," Elena said calmly, "you are fired." Peters blinked. "Excuse me? Who do you think you are? Security." "I am the owner of Vanguard Ventures," Elena announced, her voice projecting to the back of the room, "which owns 100% of the voting stock of this company. Effective immediately, the board is dissolved. Every executive in this room who is currently drinking on the clock is terminated for cause." She turned her gaze to Jessica. "And you," Elena said, stepping closer. Jessica shrank back. "You're not just fired. You're being evicted. The company lease on your apartment in Belltown has been cancelled as of 10 minutes ago. Security is already there, packing your things into boxes on the curb." Jessica gasped. You bitch! Mark will kill you." "Mark is currently trying to figure out how to pay for a taxi without a corporate credit card," Elena said. "Security, escort Ms. Miller and her colleagues out of the building. If they touch a computer, arrest them for corporate espionage." Pandemonium erupted. Men in suits started shouting, Jessica started screaming, and phones started ringing. Elena stood in the center of the chaos, perfectly still, like the eye of a hurricane. She walked into Mark's office, the corner office with the view of the Space Needle. It smelled of his cologne. She walked to the desk, picked up the framed photo of Mark shaking hands with the mayor, and dropped it into the wastebasket. Then she sat in his chair. It was comfortable. "Mr. Graves," she said into the intercom. "Yes, madam?" "Get me the file on Project Chimera, the one Mark was hiding." Elena knew Mark was a thief, but she also knew Horizon was working on something legitimately valuable. A quantum encryption algorithm that the government was interested in. It was the only reason she hadn't shut the company down completely. But as she logged into Mark's computer, using the override codes provided by her back-end team, she found something disturbing. The files for Project Chimera weren't there. The folder was empty. She checked the access logs. The files had been copied and deleted 3 hours ago, while they were in court. "Graves," Elena said, her voice tight. "Get in here. We have a problem." Someone else had been inside the system. Someone who knew Mark was going to lose today. Someone who had stripped the company of its only real asset before Elena could reclaim it. On the screen, a text file popped up. It hadn't been there a second ago. "Welcome back, Miss Sinclair. We've been waiting for you to come out of hiding." Elena's blood ran cold. While Elena was discovering the digital theft, Mark Vance was sitting on a wet bench in Pioneer Square, staring at a pigeon pecking at a cigarette butt. He was ruined. His credit cards had been declined at the coffee shop. His phone service had been cut off remotely. He had $12 in his pocket, a black sedan pulled up to the curb. It wasn't a luxury car like Elena's. It was a nondescript government-issue Ford, the kind used by people who didn't want to be remembered. The rear window rolled down. "Get in, Mark," a voice said. Mark looked up. "Who are you?" "A friend, or at least a mutual enemy of Elena Sinclair." Desperation makes people do stupid things. Mark didn't ask for ID. He didn't run. He opened the door and slid into the dry warmth of the car. Inside sat a man who looked like he was carved out of granite. He had silver hair, cold blue eyes, and a scar running through his left eyebrow. He wore a suit that cost more than Mark's former salary, but he wore it carelessly. "My name is Victor Draven," the man said. He handed Mark a flask. "Drink. You look like hell." Mark took a swig. It was brandy, burning and expensive. "She took everything, Mr. Draven. She's a monster. A billionaire heiress pretending to be a housewife. Who does that?" "Someone who is hiding," Draven said softly. "Someone who knows that her father had many enemies." Draven tapped on a tablet resting on his knees. He turned the screen toward Mark. It showed a live feed of the Horizon Dynamics lobby. Mark saw his former staff being escorted out by security guards holding boxes. "You built that company, didn't you, Mark?" Draven manipulated him smoothly. "Sure, she provided the money, but you provided the sweat, the image, the face." "Exactly," Mark cried. "I did all the work." "And now she has humiliated you," Draven continued. "She didn't just fire you. She castrated you publicly. Do you want to just sit here and rot, or do you want to get even?" Mark's eyes narrowed. "I want to destroy her." "Good," Draven smiled. It was a terrifying expression, "because I need something she has, and you are the only person who can help me get it." "What do you need? Money?" "She has billions." "I don't care about money," Draven scoffed. "I represent, let's call it a private consortium, more exclusive than the Sinclairs. We are interested in information, specifically a digital key that Silas Sinclair, Elena's father, stole from us 10 years ago." Mark was confused. Silas Sinclair was a shipping magnate. Silas Sinclair was a courier for the most powerful people on Earth, Draven corrected. He moved things that weren't supposed to be moved: weapons, gold, secrets. Before he died, he locked away a database of his clients, a black ledger. We believe he hid the encryption key inside Horizon Dynamics. Mark frowned. "That's impossible. I built the servers. I would know." "Would you?" Draven raised an eyebrow. Silas was a genius. He knew his daughter would eventually take over a tech firm or create one. He embedded the key in the source code of the first program Elena ever wrote, the code base you use to start Horizon. Mark's mind raced. The original kernel, the foundational code Elena had given him on a USB drive when they first started dating. She had said it was just a logistics optimizer she wrote for fun. He had built the entire company's software architecture on top of it. "Project Chimera," Mark whispered. "Precisely," Draven said. "We wiped the servers today to get the files, but they are encrypted. We need the biokey to unlock them, and the biokey is Elena herself, her retina, her fingerprint, or a password only she knows." "So what do you want me to do?" Mark asked. "She won't talk to me." "She won't have to," Draven said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small metallic device that looked like a flash drive with a needle tip. "You lived with her for 5 years, Mark. You know her habits. You know where she goes when she's sad. You know the name of her first pet. You know the answers to her security questions." Draven leaned in close. "I'm going to give you resources, a new identity, money. But in exchange, you are going to help us kidnap Elena Sinclair." Mark recoiled. "Kidnap? No, I'm not a criminal. I just want my company back." "You are already a criminal, Mark," Draven said coldly. "Embezzlement, fraud. Elena has the evidence to put you in prison for 20 years. If you work with me, I can erase that evidence. I can give you Horizon back once we have what we want. Or you can get out of this car and wait for the police to arrive. They are tracking your phone, you know." Mark looked out the window. A police cruiser was turning the corner, lights flashing silently. Panic seized him. He looked back at Draven. The devil was offering him a hand. "What do I have to do?" Mark asked. Meanwhile, In the penthouse suite of the Four Seasons Hotel near Pike Place Market, Elena was pacing. She had moved here for the night, deeming her old apartment unsafe. Graves was standing by the door. The room was filled with flowers sent by well-wishers, people who had ignored her for years, but suddenly remembered they were her best friends once the news of her billions broke. But Eleanor wasn't looking at the flowers. She was looking at a private report sent over by her contact at BlackRock, the global investment management firm. The report detailed a series of hostile stock purchases of the Sinclair Consortium's subsidiaries. Someone was buying up her family's empire, piece by piece, using shell companies masked in Singapore and Dubai. "They are coming for me, Graves," Elena said, holding the paper. "My father warned me about this. He said the sharks would circle the moment I showed blood." "We have tripled security, madam," Graves assured her. "No one gets within 100 yards of you without my permission." "It's not physical safety I'm worried about," Elena said, walking to the window to look out at the dark waters of Puget Sound. "It's the secrets. Mark mentioned something in court about the software. He didn't understand what he was saying, but he said the code was acting strange last month." She turned to Graves. "My father hid something in my code, didn't he?" Graves stiffened. He remained silent for a long time. "Mr. Graves," Elena said sharply, "I am the head of this family now. Do not lie to me." Graves sighed, his posture sagging slightly. "Your father, Silas, he wasn't just a businessman, Eleanor. He was a keeper of secrets. He called it the Oculus, a database of leverage on every major politician and CEO in the G7 nations. He wanted to destroy it, but he died before he could. He hid it in the one place he knew you would protect." "My work," Elena realized. "He hid it in the Horizon algorithm." "Yes," Graves admitted. "And there are people, very dangerous people, who want it back. Mark Vance was just a nuisance. The people coming now? They are war." Just then, Elena's phone buzzed. It wasn't a text. It was a notification from her home security system, her old apartment, the one she had abandoned that morning. Motion detected. Living room. She pulled up the camera feed on her phone. On the screen, she saw a figure walking through her dark, empty living room. The figure picked up a framed photo Elena had left behind, a picture of her and Mark from their wedding day. The figure turned to the camera. It was Mark, but he looked different. He was wearing black tactical gear, and he smiled right into the lens, holding up a sign written in marker. "I know where the key is." Elena dropped the phone. "Graves," she whispered, "prepare the jet. We're not safe in Seattle anymore." "Where are we going?" Graves asked, drawing his weapon as he moved to the window. "Zurich," Elena said. "To the vault. If my father left a mess, I have to go to the source to clean it up." But as they rushed to the door, the lights in the hotel suite flickered and died. The electronic lock on the door clicked. Red. "System jammed." Graves barked into his radio. "We are locked in." From the hallway they heard the heavy thud of boots. Plan B had begun. The penthouse of the Four Seasons Seattle was plunged into absolute darkness, save for the eerie red glow of the emergency smoke detectors blinking on the ceiling. The silence that followed the power cut was heavy, broken only by the sound of Graves racking the slide of his suppressed Sig Sauer P226. "Stay behind the kitchen island, madam," Graves whispered, his voice barely audible. "They've bypassed the electronic locks. They'll breach in 3, 2, crash." The heavy double doors of the suite didn't just open, they were blown off their hinges. 2 canisters skittered across the marble floor, hissing violently. "Flashbangs! Eyes shut!" Graves roared. Elena squeezed her eyes shut and covered her ears just as a deafening bang shook the room, followed by a blinding white light that seared even through her eyelids. When she opened them, chaos had erupted. 3 figures clad in black tactical gear and night vision goggles were swarming to the room. Graves was a blur of motion. He fired 2 controlled shots. Thwip! Thwip! And the first attacker crumpled near the foyer. But they were outnumbered. "Secure the target," a voice shouted from the hallway. It wasn't Mark. It was a professional mercenary. Elena realized with a jolt of terror that she wasn't just a divorcee anymore. She was the package. She looked around the kitchen. She didn't have a gun. She had lived as a librarian, a pacifist. But she was also a Sinclair. She crawled across the floor, staying below the granite countertop. She reached for the smart home control panel mounted on the wall near the fridge. The screen was dead due to the power cut, but the backup battery light was blinking green. Elena smashed the glass casing with a heavy ceramic bowl and ripped the panel open. Her fingers, usually so delicate, worked with frantic precision. She needed to access the building's override. "Graves, get down!" Elena screamed. Graves didn't hesitate. He dove behind the heavy oak dining table, just as Eleanor short-circuited the emergency fire suppression system wires together. Whoosh! The ceiling sprinklers didn't activate. Instead, the halon gas system, designed to protect the high-end art in the penthouse, discharged. A thick, white, suffocating fog instantly filled the room, sucking the oxygen out of the air to starve a fire. The attackers choked. Their night vision was useless in the dense white fog. "Move! Now!" Graves grabbed Elena's arm, pulling her toward the service entrance in the pantry. He kicked the door open. They spilled out into the concrete stairwell, gasping for air. Graves was bleeding from a graze on his cheek, but his eyes were focused. "We can't use the elevators," Graves said, checking the magazine of his pistol. "They'll have the lobby locked down. We need to go to the basement." "The garage?" Elena asked, her chest heaving. "They'll be waiting there." "Not the garage," Graves said grimly. "The sub-basement, laundry and waste disposal." They ran down 40 flights of stairs. Elena's lungs burned. Her Chanel heels had been kicked off floors ago. She was running barefoot on cold concrete. It was a stark contrast to the courtroom earlier that day. She had been fighting for her dignity then. Now, she was fighting for her life. When they reached the bottom, the air smelled of wet linen and trash. They navigated the labyrinth of corridors until they reached the loading dock. A large garbage truck was idling, its compactor groaning. A worker in a jumpsuit was loading bags. Graves walked up to him, flashed a badge that Eleanor didn't recognize, and handed the man a stack of cash from his pocket. "Take a break. 30 minutes. The worker didn't ask questions. He took the money and vanished. "Get in." Graves gestured to the cab of the truck. Elena stared at him. The garbage truck. "It's the only vehicle leaving this building that the police and Draven's men won't search," Graves said. "Unless you want to go back upstairs and ask Mark for a ride?" Elena climbed in. As Graves gunned the heavy engine and rolled the truck out of the loading bay, Elena slumped in the passenger seat. She watched through the dirty side mirror as black SUVs swarmed the hotel entrance. They had escaped by the skin of their teeth. "Graves," Elena said, her voice trembling as the adrenaline faded. "Who are those people? That wasn't just corporate espionage. That was a hit squad." Graves kept his eyes on the road, merging onto the I-5 highway, heading south toward Boeing Field. "Victor Draven," Graves said, the name sounding like a curse. "He's an information broker, a fixer for governments that want to deny their operations. He's been hunting your father's Oculus database for 10 years. He thinks you have the key." "And Mark?" Elena asked quietly. Is he with them?" Graves glanced at her. Mark is weak, Elena, and weak men are dangerous because they will do anything to feel powerful again. Draven has him, and Mark knows things about you that Draven can use. Eleanor looked down at her bare, bruised feet. He knows my security questions, she whispered, realization dawning on her. He knows the name of my first dog. He knows the street I grew up on. He knows my mother's maiden name. We need to get to the jet, Graves said, stepping on the gas. Once we are in the air, we can scrub your digital footprint. But until then, you are vulnerable. The Gulfstream G650, bearing the tail number N1 SIN, roared down the runway of Boeing Field. As the wheels lifted off the wet tarmac, Elena felt a momentary sense of relief. At 45,000 feet, she felt untouchable. She went to the lavatory to wash the soot from her face. She looked in the mirror. The woman staring back wasn't the meek housewife Mark had divorced. Her eyes were hard, dark, and full of a cold resolve. She walked back into the main cabin. It was a flying palace, cream leather seats, mahogany trim, a satellite uplink. Graves was sitting by the window, cleaning his weapon. "We are plotting a course for Geneva," Graves said. "I've contacted the Banque Pictet. They have a secure vault in the Geneva Freeport where your father stored his physical assets. If the key isn't in the code, it's there." The Geneva Freeport, Elena mused. The most secure storage facility on Earth. Tax-free, no questions asked. She sat down and opened her laptop. She needed to see the damage to her accounts. She logged into the Vanguard Ventures mainframe. Access denied. She frowned. She tried again. Access denied. Biometric mismatch. "That's odd," Elena muttered. "Graves, I can't log in." Suddenly, the large LCD screen on the bulkhead of the plane flickered. The flight map disappeared. Static filled the screen, followed by a live video feed. Elena gasped. It was Mark. He was sitting in a dark room, illuminated by the blue glow of multiple monitors. He looked manic. His tie was loose, his eyes wide and bloodshot. He was wearing a headset. "Hello, Elena," Mark's voice boomed through the cabin speakers. "Nice plane. Much better than the economy seats we used to fly, right?" "Mark!" Elena stood up, shouting at the screen. "What have you done? You're hacking a private aircraft. That's an act of terrorism." "I'm just retrieving what's mine," Mark spat back. "You thought you could leave me with $1? You thought you were so smart, hiding your billions? Well, guess what? I know you, Elena. I know your passwords are all variations of the coordinates of where we had our first kiss." Elena froze. He was right. She was sentimental. She had never changed them. "I'm currently inside the Sinclair Consortium root directory," Mark bragged, typing furiously as he spoke. "I've liquidated the liquid assets in the Cayman accounts. 300 million. Gone. Transferred to an untraceable crypto wallet." "Mark, stop!" Elena pleaded. "Draven is using you. Once he gets what he wants, he'll kill you." "He treats me with respect," Mark screamed. "He sees my value. Unlike you. You treated me like a pet project." Mark leaned into the camera. "But money isn't enough, Elena. Draven wants the key. And I know you're heading to Switzerland. I saw the flight plan before I wiped it." "Wiped it?" Graves stood up, moving toward the cockpit. "Oh, didn't I mention?" Mark smirked. "I've uploaded a new flight path to your autopilot. You aren't going to Geneva." The plane banked sharply to the right. The coffee pot on the table slid off and crashed. Elena grabbed a seat to steady herself. "Pilot!" Graves yelled, banging on the cockpit door. "Disengage autopilot!" The intercom crackled. The pilot's voice was panicked. "I can't, sir. The system is locked out. We've been hijacked remotely. The controls are dead." "Where are you taking us, Mark?" Elena shouted at the screen. Mark smiled, a cruel, twisted expression. Somewhere you can't run. Somewhere Draven has waiting for you. You're going to land in Belarus, Elena, outside of US jurisdiction. Draven has a reception committee waiting at the Minsk airfield. You're sending me to my death, Elena said, her voice barely a whisper. I'm sending you to negotiate, Mark said. Just give them the key, Elena. And maybe I'll let you keep the dollar. The screen went black. The plane was shaking now. They were descending. Graves turned to Eleanor. We have 2 hours before we reach Belarusian airspace. We can't regain control of the avionics without a hard reset, and to do that, we need to sever the satellite uplink manually. How do we do that? Elena asked. Graves pointed to a panel on the exterior of the plane, visible through the window near the wing. The antenna array is out there. Someone has to go into the avionics bay, the hell hole in the tail of the plane, and cut the physical wire. I'll do it, Elena said. It's tight, freezing, and unpressurized, Graves warned. And if you cut the wrong wire, we lose the engines. I wrote the code for the logistics of this jet, Graves, Elena said, ripping the hem of her skirt so she could move freely. I know the schematics. Mark thinks he can fly my plane? He forgot one thing. What's that? I own the hardware. Elena grabbed a pair of wire cutters from the emergency kit. Get me into the bay. I'm taking back my life. The air in the unpressurized avionics bay was thin and bitingly cold. Elena's fingers were numb as she located the satellite uplink cable, a thick blue wire pulsating with the data Mark was feeding into the system. This ends now, she whispered. With a grunt of effort, she squeezed the wire cutters. Snap! The plane lurched violently. In the cockpit, the screens flashed from red to green. The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, breathless but relieved. Miss Sinclair, we have manual control, diverting to Zurich immediately. We are safe. Elena slumped against the freezing metal hull, exhaling a cloud of mist. She hadn't just cut the connection, she had traced the IP address of the incoming signal before severing it. 6 hours later, in a warehouse district on the outskirts of Seattle, Mark Vance stared at his monitors. They had all gone black. What happened? Mark screamed, slamming his fist on the desk. I had them! They were landing in Minsk! You failed! A cold voice said behind him. Victor Draven was packing his equipment into a briefcase. The signal was cut, and worse, you stayed online too long. They traced the handshake. We have to leave, Mark panicked. I have to leave, Draven corrected, walking to the back door. You are the distraction. Before Mark could protest, the front doors of the warehouse were rammed open by an armored SWAT vehicle. Flashbangs detonated. Mark fell to his knees, coughing, blinded, realizing too late that in the game of billionaires, he was just a pawn. 2 days later, Mark sat in a federal interrogation room, handcuffed to the table. The door opened, and Elena walked in. She looked immaculate in a white power suit, flanked by Graves. You're going away for a long time, Mark, Elena said quietly. Kidnapping, cyber-terrorism, grand larceny. I just wanted what I was owed, Mark hissed, though he looked broken. I just wanted the key. Where is it? Where did your father hide the Oculus code? Was it in the servers? In your DNA? Elena laughed softly, a sound devoid of humor. She reached into her purse and pulled out a small, velvet pouch. She tipped it over, and a ring slid onto the metal table. It was the cheap, tarnished engagement ring Mark had given her 5 years ago. The one he had mocked in court. The one he had told her to throw in the trash because it was embarrassing. My father was a sentimental man, Elena said. He used micro-engraving technology to print the entire Oculus database onto a synthetic diamond. He told me to guard it with my life. When you gave me this ring, I swapped the stone Mark stared at the cheap piece of jewelry he had despised. His eyes widened in horror. "It was on your finger," Mark whispered, his voice trembling. "For 5 years, I was sleeping next to $12 billion of leverage, and I mocked it." "You chased the illusion of wealth, Mark," Elena said, standing up to leave, "and you threw away the only thing that had real value. You threw away me." She walked out of the room, leaving the ring on the table. It was evidence now. As the heavy steel door clanged shut, Mark Vance put his head in his hands and screamed. And that is how Elena Sinclair turned the tables. Mark Vance thought he was discarding a broke housewife, but he was actually throwing away the keys to the kingdom, quite literally. He is currently serving a 25-year sentence in federal prison. Elena regained control of Horizon Dynamics, donated the Oculus database to Interpol to expose global corruption, and now runs her empire with the grace and steel of a true queen. She proved that true value isn't found in a bank account, but in character. Mark chased the shine and lost the diamond. What do you think? Did Mark deserve his fate, or was the punishment too harsh? Let me know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story of karma and revenge, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. And don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss our next real-life drama. Thanks for watching, and see you in the next story.